Our guest this week has such an important story, we split it into two parts. Part one will cover the history of Peter Humphrey and his founding of China Ways, which was the gold standard of due diligence in China, up until the day of his arrest. We hope you enjoy the show.
I saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the view of Wolfpack Research or any of its officers. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. We are not investment advisors. We hold no registrations with the SEC, FINRA, or any other regulatory agency, and none of the opinions expressed on this podcast should be considered investment advice. The listener should assume that we have positions in and stand to benefit from any stock or other security mentioned on this podcast. Do your own research before making investment decisions.
Welcome to the Wolf Den, everybody. This is Dan David coming back at you with the pack. The pack being Carl the sound guy. and the hearty laugh that goes with it. Carl's going to be on his best behavior today because I have an exciting guest for myself.
Important guest.
Yeah, one of my heroes in the China due diligence business. I think should be everybody's. We have Peter Humphrey with us, the man who loved China. That's L-O-V-E-D now. And I think he probably still does in some ways. Peter spent 46 years in business, education, media, investigations, and philanthropy in China. His story is something that everybody needs to hear, not because of the tragedy of it, and there is plenty of tragedy, unfortunately. But Peter does not want you to feel sorry for him. It should be a cautionary tale. His story should be an alarm for anyone who thinks Western values means anything to the CCP. Or I would add to that you have any protection from our government from the CCP while you're there, or help for that matter. Peter currently wears many hats. He's a political analyst, a journalist, a commentator, documentary advisor, an expert witness focusing on the business in China. Peter has worked with Harvard University, my alma mater, King's College in London, and RUSI. He's also spoken at many universities and think tanks. He's a contributor to the Diplomat, the Sunday Times, the Financial Times, and advises many news outlets on China stories and documentaries. Peter is a strident advocate of campaigning against the PRC practice of forced televised confessions from personal experience, and donates his time to mentoring families of arbitrarily imprisoned foreigners in China. He may best be known for when he and his wife, Ying, were arbitrarily imprisoned in Shanghai for 2 years from 2013 to 15 on false charges related to their work for GlaxoSmithKline, that little company, as a due diligence firm and an anti-fraud consultancy. That's what you'll find a lot written about on the internet. But we have Peter here to tell you about his experience in person. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I have to tell you, over the years, I've thought about you a lot, and now that we've had a chance to meet, and it was again had a very nice dinner with you and your wife, I can see why you were such a formidable team, because you really were a team. She's a incredibly intelligent lady, and I'm sure had a big part of your business in that way. But when I was starting out in the business, yeah, you were kind of the gold standard. People would come to us when they wanted cheaper prices.
You were the Walmart of due diligence?
No. We were more like a local chain. We were the Wawa of due diligence. So tell us, how did you get started in this? And give us a little bit about your background, Peter, before you were, because you had a rich history before you got into the due diligence business in China, and just kind of back us into that.
Well, I grew up in England, and when I was a teenager, I started getting interested in China because it was opening tiny cracks, back in the early 1970s. And so I decided to study Chinese studies at university, which I did at Durham University in the UK. And then I set out to the Far East to try and build a career. Initially, I taught at a campus in Beijing, which is now called the Peking Culture and Languages University. It used to be called Peking Languages Institute. I taught there for a year or so, but I was always interested in journalism, and I managed to get to work for several news outlets as a freelancer, moonlighting from my teaching job And then I joined the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong as a full-time senior reporter writing about China. And from there, I migrated to Reuters in London to join their international staff as a foreign correspondent. And because I was such an expert on China, of course, they sent me somewhere completely different. My first overseas assignment, they sent me to Vienna because I was also quite knowledgeable about the communist countries of Eastern and Central Europe. And
yeah, Vienna's not so bad, though.
Yeah, Vienna's a nice place. So yeah, I actually ended up spending a 10-year diversion in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. I covered the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the collapse of the former Yugoslavia into civil war. And then by way of a one-year sabbatical at Harvard, I went back to Reuters after that year and was posted finally back to the China region and became the deputy bureau chief in Hong Kong, which took me through, all of the exposure of the Hong Kong handover of sovereignty from Britain to China. I covered the lowering of the flag, and a year after the handover, I decided to get out of journalism and into the due diligence industry.
So you're talking 97 handover, 98.
Yeah, so I transferred into the due diligence industry in 1998. I joined Kroll in Hong Kong. And within a year, they sent me to Beijing to run their China business, which I did. But, from time to time, Kroll went through earthquakes. And after 3 years working for Kroll, their Asian operation unraveled, basically. And I won't finger any names, but it left me in a bit of a difficult situation where I was running a successful China off Beijing, but the region around me just fell apart. So I went to join a new department at PwC, which was called PwCIA, which stood for PwC Investigations Asia Limited. I worked in that operation for 2 years, heading China-based work. And at the end of that, my boss in that department had a big punch-up with the top level management of PwC. So I had to get out of there because they closed our department down.
Yes, they did.
That's when I began my own company called China Wise Limited with my wife sort of backing me up. And we operated China Wise. That's China with a WHYS on the end of it. So it's the plural of questions and answers. We operated it successfully for 10 years. And we never got into trouble. We developed a very good reputation, a small company with a big footprint. And as you said, we were like the gold standard. It wasn't because we were super expensive. It was just because we were really very good at our work.
Well, before you get into China-wise, you've said a lot here about a lot of different companies. And we definitely want to talk about China-wise and what happened when there was trouble. But I have some axes to grind.
You?
I do. I have some shit to sling, and maybe you can fill in some blanks here. We'll start with the least. How do you think the South China Morning Post has changed over the years? What were they like pre-handover? Because I guess that's when you were working for them, right? And then what are they like today? And does that relate at all to the Apple News outlet that was in China before everybody there got arrested?
When I worked for China Wise in the beginning of the 1980s, so 81, 82, around that time, it was still very much, British Hong Kong, and the South China Morning Post was a very lively newspaper. It was the dominant English language newspaper in the region, and it had fantastic sales and advertising revenues. It was a rich newspaper, and editorially, it was quite free and open, except I think, sometimes maybe they would pull their punches when it came to criticism of the government, which at that time was the British government. But, it was an open and transparent society. The judicial system was fully based on English law, and so we had the rule of law, at least in the court system. Trials were fair and transparent, and newspapers could cover court sessions and so forth, no problem. Very, very different from mainland China. But over the years, I've continued to have some contact with people working there, and I've seen the paper gradually change. I mean, I suppose by now we should have expected it to have become the People's Daily of Hong Kong in some sort of way, and totally controlled and colored by the Chinese Communist Party propaganda apparatus. That hasn't quite happened, to be fair. I mean, I think what's happened is essentially that there are factions within the SCMP. Some of these factions represent different strands of Chinese political thought, hardliner and liberal and so forth. And I guess there's still a kind of lingering, faction that supports the idea of an internationally sort of recognized standard for free press. So it's a bit of a mixed bag right now, and you can't trust everything that you read in the South China Morning Post, but it's still a useful source of information.
You don't think they're now massively pulling their punches when it comes to reporting on the PRC?
They're careful, but then occasionally you see something that you don't expect to see if they're pulling their punches all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the Apple Daily, what do you think about? Do you think that guy Jimmy Lai is ever going to get out of jail?
I mean, Jimmy Lai, had a lot of respect in Hong Kong society, in my opinion. Both as a retailer, with his Apple, the Giordano fashion stores that he used to own, which he built that business, and with his newspaper business, and with his very, very sort of maverick, outgoing news, which, as we know, was very, very critical of communism, the Communist Party. I think he was very brave. He's always referred to as a tycoon, but he's not among the richest of the rich tycoons. There's no way you would put him on the same ranking with someone like Li Ka-shing, for example.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think he was a decent man, but perhaps at the end of the day, a slightly naive man, facing up to the power that is now wielded to bash Hong Kong in the last 2 or 3 years. He continued to face it down, perhaps thinking that somehow the democratic sentiment could win the battle in Hong Kong. And of course, he ended up in jail. And will he ever get out of jail, you asked? I suspect he will, but I don't think it'll be anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't either. Okay, so on to a couple more companies that I'm even less thrilled with. Kroll, you worked for Kroll.
Mm.
Now, when I talked about us being the cheaper version of ChinaWise, everybody in the world's a cheaper version of Kroll, who is way overpriced and I, from what I've seen, underdelivers. What was your real experience with Kroll? I mean, it just seems like a real political mishmash of a culture there.
Well, I think first of all, I haven't seen any of Kroll's work or fee structure recently, and of course, it's gone through various splits and ructions over the years since I was there. And there's now a Kroll Mark II, which is run by the son of Jules Kroll, Jeremy Kroll, and the company that's called Kroll now isn't the original Kroll family. Kroll is not the same company.
Uh-huh.
But the Kroll that I joined in 1998 in Hong Kong was the original Jules Kroll company. And I think, despite the fact that you might consider it to have been the expensive company and so forth in that industry, it did have a lot of track record and cachet as far as I could see when I joined it, which is why I joined it. But I was also quite shocked when I got inside the company and found out how much they actually charged clients for doing this and that.
Yeah.
And I think that the quality of Kroll Asia, which is what I was most exposed to Kroll Asia, the quality of Kroll Asia was high at that time. The guy who headed the region, I'm not going to name names here because if I do, he'll probably sue me, but the guy who headed the region was very money driven, very driven, and was a good salesman. I mean, the regional head of Kroll would go around knocking on company doors, selling the services. And, I guess he could have sold a dead donkey to a fashion outlet. He was a good salesman. But over time, I noticed that very often a lot of promises were not delivered, clients could be quite disappointed at the end of an investigation or at the end of an
Right.
assignment, facing a big bill and feeling that they didn't really quite solve their problem.
Yeah, when you're talking about like thousands and thousands of dollars for an SAIC file that probably cost a couple of $100, it was ridiculous. I mean,
well, that may have happened. It certainly didn't happen between me and any of the clients that I took care of, and this was something I was very conscious. I was very conscious of this when I eventually created my own company and actually said to prospective clients, "We're not going to leave you, dangling on a thread with unfulfilled promises and a big bill like some of the bigger companies do. We'll take you stage by stage through a situation, an ordeal, an investigation, and at the end of each stage, we'll be very frank with you about whether or not we think we can get any further if we were to do another stage, and so forth." I tried to manage expectations in a way that I don't think Kroll always did when I was there.
Well, I guess it seems like the business you eventually got into filled a gap, a need that you saw that was more informative, more hands-on, and at more of a reasonable price.
Right. We weren't the cheapest and we weren't the most expensive. I mean, I was trying to occupy some middle ground in price and in bang for buck. But I think in general, we were highly regarded by our clients for the work we did. And my motto was, every client is my next salesman. And so you want to leave your clients satisfied with the work you've done to the point that they'll be dropping your name over a bar with the head of another company tomorrow night.
True capitalist. So on to the last, not saving the least for the last, saving the most egregious, but Price Waterhouse. Isn't Price Waterhouse having an investigative division a misnomer? I mean, like an oxymoron? It
was, but I'll tell you a secret, and that is that my boss at Kroll Asia, who left and then Kroll Asia unraveled, he set up this department at PwC. So he sold PwC this idea to have this investigative subsidiary in Asia. So basically, he recreated his Kroll Asia inside PwC. And in my opinion, this genre of due diligence business or fraud investigation business was never welcome by the greater PwC organization.
Well, that's not a secret. You said you were going to tell us a secret. A
lot of the partners within PwC weren't comfortable with it.
Really?
They already had, they had a kind of computer forensics and financial forensics practices within PwC already. And they weren't comfortable with this cloak and dagger organization that suddenly got planted into.
No. They had enough of an investigative division, which is based on algorithms or computer programs or whatever, that they could.
It is now, yeah.
Lean back on in a lawsuit and say, well, Magic 8 Ball said to do this. But they never wanted to have anything that was so good that they would actually turn down a client.
Yeah, lose their fees.
Yeah, it was, and there was certainly rivalry between PwCIA and the other sort of investigative bits of PwC that existed at the time. But when I became PwCIA's leader in Beijing, I did a lot of diplomacy within PwC, internal diplomacy, and managed to win support from quite a number of partners, and gradually they started referring bits and pieces to me, above and beyond what I went out and sold myself. And so that was working. It took time. But then my boss had another punch up. He had a punch up with PwC, and our department just got closed down. So I was very unfortunate. So I decided I was never going to follow him anywhere again.
Well, that's a good move, and that's what you get for being effective. And look, I mean, I would say this about PwC as well. They're not any better, worse, or different than any of the others. If you talk about Deloitte or KPMG, Ernst & Young, all of them. And in my opinion, certainly I don't have a lot of respect for the work that they've done over there. And they're not the actual A team, right? They're not, Price Waterhouse in China is not Price Waterhouse in the United States. They're a completely separate charter.
Even less so now, or should I say even more so now, that is the situation, because since I was there, which is now a long time ago, it's PwC in China has become very Chinese.
Were there any just absolute frauds that you looked at when you were at PwC that management just said, yeah, thanks for the report, go back to your desk, we're still taking them as a client?
No, I mean, and it didn't really work that way. You can't consider it to be PwC management, because the head of my department, PwCA, was extremely secretive towards the greater PwC partnership, and they actually didn't get to see a lot of our work.
Oh.
He managed to persuade them that it was too confidential for them to look at it, things like that, making them even more uncomfortable. But no,
right. You don't want to see this.
But within PwCIA, things went very much as they had done within Kroll Asia. It was just the same operation with a different name.
Right. Yeah, and the same effectiveness or lack thereof, I would imagine. So from there, getting into the interesting and I'm sure, triggering part of this conversation for you, you start ChinaWise. You're successful there. I mean, by any measure, you have corporate clients that anybody at Kroll or PwC would want, like GlaxoSmithKline, for instance. That's been discussed in many different articles, so I'm not divulging any kind of confidential relationship there. But you had many clients like that were, white shoe, highbrow, and you did investigations for them. You want to tell us about like some of the investigations you did?
First of all, when I started my own little company, I didn't take any clients away from my previous employers. Everything was actually based on sympathy, because I was treated quite badly on my way out of Kroll when I tried.
How are you treated badly? What do you mean?
Well, I went after PwC. I went briefly back to Kroll. They hired me to run China again under a different leadership of the region, and within a few months, it became clear that the person who they had removed from that job didn't want to be removed from that job, and he managed to engineer a so-called restructuring of the management in Asia, and forced me out after just a few months of having been rehired. And many people in the business community in Shanghai and Beijing, when they saw that happen, they were quite pissed off, because I was quite popular and I had a good following in our sector. And as soon as I was pushed out again from my second incarnation at Kroll, people just started calling me up and offering me assignments, and they were not former clients. They were just.
All right. So when you're on your way out at Kroll, what I mean, does this look like How I'm Going to Fire Carl, when I just have a box and I put him in the box and throw him out, or did they?
Well, I'm sure that you wouldn't be as mean and horrible and brutal and vile as Kroll.
No, he
listen. I lull myself to sleep thinking about it, so I wouldn't be too sure about it. Yeah, I mean, so take us through it. I mean, they just call you up one day and say you're gone, and
it was pretty much like that.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
And as I say, a lot of people in the business community knew me, and they just said, I know someone who needs your services. And so I got lots of referrals very quickly, and was able to build a good list of clients.
And this is what year now?
That was in the year 2003 and 2004.
So you really had ChinaWise until effectively 2013.
Yeah, 10 years.
So about 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years.
I mean, you were there pretty much at the very beginning of China-based companies being listed on U.S. exchanges.
Yeah.
The RTO.
Way before the RTO.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, you were interested in getting a feel for the kind of clients that we worked for. I mean, some were small, but some were very big. For example, we did a massive investigation project for Dell. It began with them worrying that they might have an FCPA problem. But after a lot of extensive investigation across the whole organization, what we found was something more like a distribution fraud issue. And essentially the company was being badly ripped off by its distribution staff and so forth. And it wasn't in the end an FCPA case, but that was a very big client, and we worked for many other big American firms, Terex, the Crane company.
Can you tell us like some of the processes you went through to find that, okay, it's not FCPA? I mean, the fact they're looking into it kind of, says they're more concerned than to have an FCPA violation, but you found that in their supply chain, they're being ripped off. How did you find that?
Okay, well, I mean, we use of course, we gather a lot of information in from our client. We ask for a lot of information we can analyze and study. And in a thing like that, we need to have a good grasp of their organization. You understand what the business model should be.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got, lots of things like maybe a whistleblower letter or two and things like that, which are providing you with clues and leads.
Yeah.
In this case, we actually managed to persuade a senior whistleblower to come out of hiding. And we actually managed to interview him, and we gathered a lot of leads that way. So we knew where to start going to look. We knew who to look at. And we had 4 parallel simultaneous surveillance operations going on different people at different times, even crossing the border. And we were doing all the sort of deep investigation on the suspect individuals.
What border are you crossing?
Hong Kong, China.
Hong Kong, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's right.
And Macau.
Yeah, which actually, wow. Yeah, I mean, doing investigations in Macau, very dangerous.
We didn't really have to investigate in Macau, but we wanted to know, where a certain person was going and what he was doing. That was obviously.
I can tell you exactly what they were doing in Macau.
Baccarat?
Yeah, we know, but we want to see it. We want to get evidence of it. And this case actually went on for many months, and we looked at certain distribution offices around the country. We looked at clients and contracts and so forth, and we found, hidden sort of secret additional contracts attached to the supposed contracts and things like that, with arrangements that fed money back from clients, fed money back into the pockets of certain key distribution and sales managers. And the situation was so bad that basically these people destroyed Dell's original business model, because the original business model was to sell online, not to have the computers in shops and not to have them traded in a market, but they were supposed to be sold from Dell's online platform. And these people had actually destroyed that business model. And I think because of that, later on, Dell itself officially kind of gave up its original business model in China and adopted 2 or 3 different types of model running at the same time. The big problem with Dell then at that time was that, many of its customers were very, very big government customers, entire ministries, for example, or the entire fire service of a big city, even maybe the police in some instances. So that a lot of very big government customers, and that's an area which does trigger concern about FCPA violations, which is why Dell was very worried that they might have a major FCPA issue at that time. And we worked very closely with American attorneys who were specialized in FCPA cases. In fact, we were really under their supervision more than we were under companies' supervision.
Okay.
We even had live monitoring with Dell's facilitation. We had some live monitoring of communications between people inside the Dell organization.
Which Dell gave you access to. You didn't surreptitiously do that.
We were enabled by. So this was a big eye-opening experience for us, and certainly one that earned us a lot of kudos at the time. And fortunately, we helped show to Dell that they weren't at fault. They were actually victim in this instance. We've done a number of FCPA type of investigations, as well as fraud investigations. So we do know the difference.
Yeah.
Sometimes, of course, they do become intertwined with each other. Another type of investigation that we did a lot of was more classic due diligence, and especially in M&A situations, where we often work closely with M&A lawyers representing quite large American and European companies preparing to make strategic acquisitions within China. And of course, whoever's inside your client organization promoting this or that acquisition, it doesn't want it to fail. So there's a certain amount of tension between the investigation company and whoever in the client company is pushing a particular acquisition. And the external lawyers in the middle, to some extent, they're on the side of the side of the client company in that debate. But our job was to give them a cold shower. I mean, I would always tell them, our objective is not to torpedo every deal you try to do. Our objective is to show you the traffic lights. And, very often it's not a matter of a green light or a red light. It's a matter of an amber light. And we highlight risks. And you really need to deal with those risks as part of the negotiation process. And when you do your internal financial due diligence, which you should also be doing in addition to our external due diligence, we often found things that were very alarming. For example, shareholder relationships within a target company would lead you to Communist Party officials.
Right.
And of course, that's a major concern in the FCPA realm as well. And we often found, conflict relationships within a target company. They're offering themselves
overlapping ownership, right?
Yeah, they're offering themselves to be sold.
Yeah,
they've already started creating the replacement company down the road, which is going to just carry on as usual. Once they've sold, will eventually become a useless shell. All kinds of issues like that we uncovered through online research, plus records research, lots of analysis, and doorstepping inquiries, where we sent investigators under commercial cover to actually, get themselves into target companies and under this or that excuse and bullshit, basically, and find things out on the basis of being a potential customer or a potential supplier or a potential this or that.
So a lot's changed, right?
A lot's changed since then. It's hard to say. I mean, I think that those conventional investigation companies don't do so much of that hard-nosed work anymore. Especially since I and my wife were thrown in prison. A lot of investigation companies became very wary, and some people just fled from the industry or fled from the country.
Well, right. I mean, I want to talk about that because, nominally I was in that business and I still am in that business in my current Wolfpack research company. We do investigations in China. They're for myself, though, not for clients. And basically, by the time 2013 comes around, you're doing an investigation that is not unlike many investigations you've done in the past. You maybe weren't given all the information up front from the client, which I don't know how unusual that is either. But, pulling SAIC filings, pulling hukou, pulling travel records of people, it's a thing about a communist country that people don't understand. They have a record of everything everybody does, and it's very pullable. Maybe we'll find out here someday. This is the kind of thing you've done for all these companies in the past, and for 10 years it was fine, and then one day it was not fine. Can you tell us about that day?
This was a case where we weren't arrested because of that activity. We were arrested because of whose information it was, and the police told us that during interrogations. We weren't arrested for what we did. We were arrested, because of whose information it was.
That's funny because that happens every single time. It's like it's not what you did; it's who you pissed off.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they tell you that right up front.
Right. Well, this was during interrogations. They told my wife that. Anyway, let's take a step back to
Sure.
the beginning of the question, as it were. Yeah, we were 10 years as China Wise. No client had dropped us in the shit. Okay, we had not done anything illegal, in my view, and we'd not been in trouble ever. There was a period of time when I even had some friendly contact with the security authorities. But in 2013, we were engaged by GSK, as is very widely known, and it's in the media. So I'm not divulging any new secrets by saying this. We were hired by GSK to investigate a Chinese woman who had served as a senior executive. Basically, this woman had been the government relations director for China, and her name was Vivian. Okay, and that's known as well. It's all out there. And we were given this story by the head of GSK China and the chief GSK lawyer for Asia, this story that this woman had been persuaded to leave the company 6 months earlier.
She was shown the door, kind of like the Kroll method.
because of irregularities with her travel expenses.
Uh-huh.
And they said that they now suspected her of orchestrating a smear campaign behind the scenes to try and damage the reputation of the company. They believed that she was the author of a number of letters that had gone to various government agencies. And what they didn't tell us was that actually they were very serious and detailed allegations that the whistleblower, if we may call her that, had been making.
So you didn't have the detail of the allegations. I mean,
no. I actually, as an experienced FCPA investigator, I said, look, let us investigate the allegations. Can we see the allegations, please? You must have copies of them.
Oh, there was a copy. There was a tape, wasn't there? And it was a sex tape, wasn't there?
That's a separate issue. We can come to that.
Okay.
But stay at the moment with this part of it. Basically, the story went as I've just described it. And the key thing here is that they refused to let us investigate the allegations or to show us the allegations. They said they had already done that internally and nothing had been found. There was nothing there. They said that they wanted to understand more about her background and what she was doing and so forth. They should have done that before they'd hired her a few years earlier, because she turned out to be a very powerful woman. So we agreed to do a background investigation to profile her, okay? And then they came out with this other story about how somebody had sent a video clip, and it was done via a link, not a file. It sent this video clip to senior management figures in the global organization, alleging that the head of China, Mark Riley, was corrupt and that there was some kind of illicit relationship between him and this Chinese woman who he was seen fucking in this video.
Oh.
Right?
Oh.
In his own bedroom in his own apartment. And so they wanted to, and he wanted to know how this was possible, who did it, And I said, look, it's pretty obvious that something like that in China could only have been done by the security authorities or with their
MSS, the Ministry of State Security.
And, there's a limit to what we can do without getting into trouble with that particular matter. And I said, look, but we can do a security assessment on this apartment and consider all the facts and so forth and come up with an assessment where we will try to, suggest how this happened and who could have been involved and whether or not your ex-employee may have orchestrated it. But, we can't go investigating the police. We accepted an assignment to conduct this profiling investigation on the lady called Vivian. And as a sidebar to that investigation, we agreed to do a little security assessment investigation on that particular apartment. And that is what we did. And we didn't uncover any kind of smoking guns on Vivian, and our report made that clear. We did, on the profiling, uncover an extremely unsavory reputation for being an unpleasant person in each company where she had worked. And we also found that there had been a similar what can I say, secret whistleblowing attack on one of her previous employers around the time that she left that company, which was...
She sounds like a real asshole.
Well, I honestly couldn't say one way or the other whether she's a real asshole or not. But we also, realized from this investigation, we discovered that she did have fairly high-level connections.
Yeah.
I mean, her father had been a senior official in the Shanghai government. He had headed the health side of the Shanghai government, and he had some, connections back to he had worked as a young man for some of the founders of the People's Republic, including Chen Yi, who was the first mayor of Shanghai. And so there were strong guanxi, Communist Party guanxi in the family. And eventually, if we had been allowed to do a phase 2, if we had gone on to do a phase 2 of our investigation later, we would have found even higher level connections, which we were only able to really confirm after our release from prison 2 years later.
Well, first we should tell people that, being the mayor of Shanghai isn't like some idiot you went to high school with that won a popularity contest. And
her father did have some kind of underling relationship in his younger life.
Well, right. And you're appointed to that position. And by the government, it's a very, very high level position, and you have to be somebody to get that job to be mayor of Shanghai, especially the first mayor.
Well, the first mayor, Chen Yi, yeah, and so Vivian's father worked in the Shanghai government all his life, and he was also a doctor, and a traditional Chinese practitioner, and this means that he got to know senior Chinese officials with health issues, and as favors, he would help them out and give them treatment from time to time. And so as a result of that, the family developed some very, very powerful relationships, which eventually, as people moved up the ladder to Beijing, they had relationships with powerful people in Beijing right at the Politburo level. And that's why we went to jail.
And that's the standing committee of the Politburo it went up to. It wasn't just like, you're talking about one of the top 9.
It was, yeah, it was.
Well, in that case, upon hearing that, you just know you're fucked, right?
Yeah, and it would never have happened if GSK had been straight with us, because, I always had a policy in my business of not investigating governments.
Good policy.
And not working for governments as well, by the way.
Another good policy.
So, I would not have undertaken the work if I had known that the real reason why they were hiring us was to investigate somebody who was blowing the whistle on a bribery racket. That's not what you should do. You should investigate the allegations, and you should try to coax the whistleblower to come out into the open and give them a fair hearing, right? And that is how I had approached FCPA investigations in the past, and as I explained with Bell, that worked very well. But essentially, for the first time in 10 years of operating our business safely, successfully, and legally, a client came along, a big company, that lied to us and dropped us in trouble.
Yeah, and without going into it, has not been there for you since. So, that story's yet to be written. I guess the story that has happened, and maybe you could take us through it, is tell us about the day. The day of. This information starts to come out. You get the feeling you're in trouble. But then there was a day where all hell broke loose, and your life and freedom were taken away.
In the run-up to that day, and that day was the 10th of July 2013. But in the run-up to that day, I started to get some sense that things were going wrong. And the first key date was the 26th of June, a couple of weeks, when GSK finally released some allegation letters to us. And I looked at these allegation letters, and I'm a person who's seen hundreds, maybe thousands of whistleblower letters and whistleblower emails and so on. One of them was just a really detailed analytical report on the structure of the bribery scheme. And I know that since then, one or two newspaper journalists have gotten hold of that document. And so when I read that, report around the 26th or the 27th of June 2013. I just said to myself, oh, shit, this is true. I said, because I can usually tell when a whistleblower report is true or false.
Or you
right?
could at least tell when it's complete bullshit. And you look at this, see, this is not complete BS.
Yeah, absolutely. So I realized that we'd been cheated, sent on a fool's errand. Okay. And at the same time, there were other things they were asking me to do, which I won't go into here, but which could well form part of our court case against them. I discovered that these allegations were serious, and I believe they were true. And then they were trying to ask me to investigation into them. That's where I kind of drew the shutters down. And by the way, what I said is in the writ against GSK. So this is a public record, and the actual substance of the writ has not been tested in any detail. GSK has said that these allegations I'm making have no merit. Well, I think it's best if a court decides whether they have any merit.
And that is filed in the Pennsylvania Superior Court, correct?
It's in the state court.
Yeah.
We originally filed it in federal court under the RICO Act, but because of the very stringent requirement for what they call domestic injury element. In other words, most of the story should be in the US, as it were. It didn't meet the test for a federal RICO case, so we then refiled it in state court, where there is no such barrier, and it was accepted. And over the last 4 or 5 years, essentially, GSK has been trying to stall it, delay it,
Sure.
prevent it from going to trial.
Waiting for you to die.
Trying to argue that the case should be sent to Beijing for arbitration, knowing full well that I and my health condition and visa condition cannot possibly do that.
Not the least of which there's no comity between our countries.
That's where we are with that. So I was very uncomfortable after reading those allegations at the end of June. And I was uncomfortable with the things they were then trying to ask me to do. And as I stated in the writ, I had a meeting on the 2nd of July with Mark Riley, and I told him that we were not able to work for him anymore.
Did you ever think about leaving? Like, hey, honey, we should maybe think about taking that trip.
No, I didn't. And of course, this is bringing us closer to your original question, which is about what happened on that day. I was responsible for a company. I was responsible for many clients. I was responsible for all my staff and so forth. It was not something you could run away from. And of course, the principal thought also was we have never done anything illegal. We've been operating legally and we've never had any problems before. But in this instance, we have been led astray and cheated. But I didn't believe that we had done anything illegal. So I saw no reason for anything to happen. But unfortunately, on the 10th of July, it did. And in the final day or two before that happened, I did have a sense that we were under surveillance. There were a few strange things that happened around the floor of our building on which our premises were located. It was on the 22nd floor of a high-rise building in Suzhou. I just felt there were some strange movements of people and things like that, and things weren't quite right. And indeed, that was true, because on the morning of 10th of July, which I believe was Wednesday morning.
What time?
It was between 7 and 8 a.m., I think.
Oh.
And the previous night, I had been out late. I'd been to 2 or 3 different functions. I'd been to a Rotary Club dinner, and then I'd gone to meet various people and came back late, rather weary.
Yeah.
And my wife was there. Ying was there.
Was it Scotch or bourbon?
I can't remember.
Oh, that was. Wow.
I do know that I had a very precious bottle of Canadian whiskey in my backpack.
No such thing.
Which came home with me and actually was found after we were released 2 years later. But
no kidding.
I would have drank that as soon as I got out.
I was tired, and my wife had just arrived that day from Beijing. Our home was in Beijing and our business was in Shanghai. And it was beyond bedtime, and we didn't talk that night about any of this. We hadn't actually had a discussion about my concerns of the last few days.
You hadn't spoken over the past few weeks, or about
No,
hey.
the past few days were the key things.
Okay.
You know, I was concerned about surveillance, and I was concerned about the fact that those allegations were probably true.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, she'd been in America until a few days before she came back to Shanghai, and you know, we couldn't really communicate over the phone about these issues that were on my mind. And I certainly didn't expect something to happen that quickly and that sudden. But during the last couple of days before it did happen, I had spoken to a friend of mine who was a former journalist colleague of mine, a guy at the Wall Street Journal, and I'd spoken to a retired London policeman who'd become a businessman and was my due diligence client about my concerns. And then 2 days later, it happened.
Did you speak to them over the phone?
No, they were face-to-face encounters.
Right. You want to tell people why you're not comfortable speaking over the phone?
I mean, the issues that were concerning me, which you know, because I've just explained them, I wouldn't have wanted those conversations to be intercepted by, you know, the all-pervasive Chinese telephone surveillance network of the PSB or the Ministry of State Security. And we know very well that they do those things all the time. And of course, now it's even worse. It's much higher.
Yeah, it's pervasive. Now they do it here.
Yeah.
Right. So on that morning, we were just getting up. You know, Ying was in a little kitchen that we had there in the office premises. We had a bedroom tucked away in the corner of the office, and we also had a little kitchen in addition to office space. And she was just making her breakfast, and I was still in the bedroom, you know, went to the bathroom, sat on the toilet kind of thing, listened to the blackbirds chirping outside the window, and all of a sudden I heard a banging on the bedroom door, which I had actually locked in case any staff came in early that morning.
Right. Because you're on the toilet, as one does. Yeah.
I was on the toilet, and so there was this banging, bang, bang. So I got up quickly, you know, finished my business, and went to the door in my underpants, and I heard Ying outside the door saying, "Peter, it's the police. You've got to open the door." And I thought, "What the hell's going on?" I was still only half awake, you know. And all of a sudden, the door flew off the hinges and hit me full on.
No way.
And I flew against the wall and the door jamb of the bathroom in there, and badly injured my neck. I still have a problem with my neck as a result of that.
Oh wow!
And I was slightly concussed for a while, and then you know. I look up and there's, you know, this blazing spotlight on me, and they're taking pictures and filming me, and someone's holding a police ID in my, you know, an inch from my eyes and things like that. It was a very shocking experience. And then I got up on my feet again, and I was told to sit on the corner of my bed and stay there. And I was not fully clothed.
And you were concussed.
Yeah.
And I was concussed, and there was a rather beefy, middle-aged man in the gang who sat in the bedroom guarding me, my minder.
Were you at gunpoint?
No, I didn't see any guns drawn.
That's how you know you weren't in the United States.
Right, absolutely, yeah, or Kenosha, and
go get them.
If you hear him howling around your kitchen door,